Hi everyone! Today we're going to explore one of the most unexpected and powerful stories of leadership the world has ever seen, and how it quietly bridged two continents. A young soldier in Burkina Faso, barely into his 30s, stood up during a time of deep unrest and shocked the global stage, not with violence or vanity, but with integrity. You'll never believe this, but in 2022, this man, Ibrahim Traoré, became the world's youngest leader of a nation. And instead of using his power to build a personal empire, he dismantled the walls between government and the people. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're watching from. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft noise, and let's get started tonight. It started in the dry heat of West Africa, a land rich in culture and courage, but too often exploited by foreign interests, corrupt elites, and forgotten promises. Burkina Faso, known for its spirit of resistance, had grown weary. Militants were advancing, trust in the government was eroding, and the people felt invisible. Enter a man no one expected, a quiet, disciplined artillery captain named Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't shout his ambition from rooftops. He wasn't the polished political type. But what he had was clarity, the kind that forms when you've spent more time in remote villages than in offices. He saw firsthand how foreign-funded policies didn't feed the hungry, how aid didn't reach the wounded, how soldiers, his brothers, bled without backup while leaders wore imported suits in air-conditioned halls. In the fall of 2022, when the government's trust collapsed, Ibrahim didn't grab power. He accepted the weight of it, with the full knowledge that the seat he took came with a target. He promised only one thing: to return power to the people. And somehow, in a region scarred by coups, people believed him. But believing wasn't the same as following. Skepticism hung heavy in the air. Another soldier with promises? They'd seen it before. Still, Ibrahim did something different. He didn't build palaces, he built forums, town hall-style discussions with farmers, teachers and elders. No fancy speeches, just a man in uniform asking questions no one else had dared ask. What do you need? What's been stolen from you? How do we build without them? And slowly, things shifted. He kicked out foreign forces who claimed to protect, but rarely delivered peace. He called out neo-colonial influence by name. He refused deals that came with strings. His critics said it was reckless. His people said it was real. At night, villages that once whispered about resistance began to speak more boldly. His name passed from child to elder like a kind of awakening, not because he was perfect, but because he was present. And in Burkina Faso, that mattered more than titles ever could. He didn't offer comfort, he offered direction. And in that dust-swept nation where history had often been written for them, Ibrahim began writing a new chapter with them. Across the Atlantic, no one in the halls of Congress knew his name yet, but they would. Thousands of miles away, in the polished chambers of Washington, D.C., the air was cooler, the suits more expensive, and the power more subtle. Jasmine Crockett didn't wear armor or command troops, but she too was walking a battlefield, one made of policy, politics, and the invisible chains of expectation. When she first stepped into office, there was a glow about her. Young, sharp, and unafraid to speak in the voice of her district. She represented people who had been neglected by the polished machinery of American politics. Working-class families, overlooked communities, truth-tellers tired of being silenced. But even with all her fire, Jasmine was stepping into a place built to soften fire, not fuel it. At first, she played the game the way she was told. Be bold in speeches, but polite in votes. be radical in campaign trail promises but flexible behind closed doors. She knew how the walls of Congress echoed with ambition, but rarely with truth. Still, she told herself, play smart, stay in, earn your seat at the table. But something kept bothering her, a feeling like her power wasn't her own. It started small, a bill that passed too quietly, funding stripped from a housing program while defense contracts ballooned overnight, lobbyists with warm smiles offering help that came with handshakes too tight. The deeper she looked, the clearer it became. Her role was respected, as long as it didn't shake the room. Then one night, while scrolling through headlines, a name caught her eye. Not a domestic name, but foreign. Ibrahim Traoré, the world's youngest president. She clicked the article out of curiosity, expecting the usual story of another strongman grabbing power. But what she read was something different, something unsettling. Here was a man who didn't rise through the system but around it, who didn't just criticize injustice, he cut ties with it. He wasn't making friends in foreign embassies, he was making enemies of the powerful for the sake of the powerless. And for Jasmine, the contrast was jarring. Here she was, afraid to upset a donor list, and there he was, expelling entire foreign forces from his soil. The realization was slow, like water seeping through a crack in the ceiling. Ibrahim had done what she hadn't yet dared to do, hold power without asking for permission. That night, she stared at her reflection longer than usual. She wasn't ashamed, just conflicted. Could you make change while staying comfortable? Could you keep your seat and still rise with your soul intact? She didn't have the answers. Not yet. But something in her shifted. The next morning, she walked into the Capitol with the same stride, but different eyes. She started asking questions in meetings that made people pause. She stopped rubber-stamping bills just because her party endorsed them. She chose moments of silence over forced applause. And while no news outlet picked it up, and no pundits praised her restraint, she knew something had begun. Jasmine Crockett, like Ibrahim Traoré, was starting to understand that power, borrowed from others, can never be fully yours. You either use power to protect your comfort, or you let go of comfort to become power. The tension was quiet but constant. While Ibrahim Traoré stood beneath the Saharan sun, shaping a new future out of dust and determination, Jasmine Crockett sat in fluorescent-lit rooms, navigating corridors laced with smiles that hid sharp teeth. On paper, they were worlds apart, a military leader in West Africa, a US congresswoman in the world's most powerful democracy. But beneath those titles was the same question whispering to them both. Whose power are you really using? Burkina Faso had answered, loudly, boldly. Traoré wasn't just rejecting neo-colonial influence, he was redefining sovereignty. Where others had traded natural wealth for aid packages, he demanded self-sufficiency. He rejected military bases in exchange for local defense. He risked isolation on the world stage to gain unity on the ground. And the people noticed. They began taking pride in things that had once been outsourced: security, agriculture, identity. The streets, once filled with protests, began to murmur with belief, the kind of belief that only comes when someone has finally said, "We are enough." Jasmine followed the stories closely, not as a fan, but as a student. The more she watched, the more she recognized her own chains. Only hers didn't look like foreign troops. They looked like polite alliances, media narratives, unquestioned traditions. Her power was padded, conditioned, approved as long as she didn't move too fast. But she wanted to move, and something deep inside her was waking up. Then came a decision that tested her newfound clarity. A bill was sliding through Congress, tucked inside a budget package almost invisible. It included provisions that would funnel more surveillance into low-income neighborhoods under the guise of safety. The same neighborhoods she grew up in, the same families who trusted her to speak for them. The leadership told her to vote yes. It was a party bill. Fall in line. She read the bill again, word for word. It stung. The safer move would be to go along, stay in favor, build seniority, maybe make change later. But the voices of her childhood, of single mothers, tired teachers, small business owners, all played in her ears like echoes from another life. And somewhere, in that quiet moment, she thought of Traoré, of how he had said no, not to provoke, but to protect, of how sometimes the smallest acts of resistance are actually the biggest acts of leadership. She voted no. The fallout was immediate: cold shoulders, closed doors, editors hinting at a lack of maturity. Even colleagues who once smiled during photo ops began keeping their distance. But outside the capital, something different was happening. Her district noticed. A mother emailed her saying thank you. A student wrote her, "I didn't think anyone up there saw us." And Jasmine felt it. Not applause, not fame, but alignment. She was no longer holding power for comfort. She was carrying it like a torch, sometimes heavy, sometimes burning, but real. Just like in Burkina Faso, she was finding that the road to freedom is not paved with ease, it's carved in choices, one hard decision at a time. They had never met, never shared a handshake, never exchanged a word. Yet the echo between them was growing louder, like thunder rolling beneath two skies, far apart, but fed by the same storm. As Traoré pushed deeper into rebuilding Burkina Faso's identity, the pressure intensified. International organizations issued warnings. News outlets framed him as unpredictable, dangerous even. Allies vanished overnight. And yet he stood. In a small village outside Ouagadougou, he sat under a tree with elders whose hands were leathered from years of labor. There were no podiums, no translators, just voices and truth. They told him what others wouldn't, that change was not about speeches, it was about sacrifice. That every time a leader chose the people over power, the price was paid not in gold, but in peace of mind. He listened. Then he asked them, "Are you ready to be uncomfortable for a while, if it means we build something that lasts?" Their answer was silence. But it wasn't the silence of fear, it was the silence of understanding. Back in America, Jasmine was having her own version of that moment. She had begun refusing certain lobby meetings. She no longer flinched when her name was left off event invites. Her inbox filled with mixed signals, some applauding, some warning her to play smarter. And then came the interview. A televised moment, a chance to clarify her vote, to clean up her message as her staff had coached. But as the cameras rolled and the lights hit her face, something in her broke the script. She didn't pivot, she didn't soften. She spoke of neighborhoods whose stories never made it to those bright studios. She spoke of how policies were drafted in the language of comfort, not survival. And she said plainly, "I'm not here to manage power, I'm here to disrupt it." The fallout was fast. But this time, so was the rise. Across social media, a wave of support swelled. Young voters, disillusioned activists, elders who had long given up on politics, they all saw in her the rarest thing in public life, honesty that doesn't apologize. She became both loved and loathed. And for the first time, Jasmine understood something that Ibrahim had long accepted, that dignity has a cost, but submission costs far more. Meanwhile, Traoré was reshaping national education to include African history from African voices. No longer would Burkina Faso's children learn their story through a colonial lens. No longer would French be the only language of learning. It wasn't just about policy, it was about pride. And that scared people, because when people rediscover their worth, they become impossible to control. Jasmine followed this, not just out of curiosity anymore, but out of kinship. She saw her own fight mirrored in his, a shared refusal to be boxed in by the old rules. Two leaders, oceans apart, both told to sit still, both choosing to stand. And while their paths would never physically cross, their courage did. Like sparks from different fires, they began lighting the same kind of flame in different corners of the world under the same sky. The storms got louder before they passed. In Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré was facing more than public policy. His choices were creating enemies, some visible, some not. Aid was being withheld. International partners sent cryptic warnings. Rumors of isolation grew thicker than dust on the city's roads. Still he kept showing up, to the fields, to the schools, to the people. He had made a decision months ago that Burkina Faso would belong to Burkinabe people, or it would belong to no one. In Washington, Jasmine Crockett's silence had become more powerful than most politicians' speeches. She spoke less in committee rooms, but when she did, people listened. Her district was seeing results, not always in dollars, but in dignity. The kinds of changes that couldn't be graphed, but were deeply felt. She began working on something quietly. A proposal to audit the pipeline between federal surveillance spending and community policing practices, especially in areas like hers. She didn't expect it to pass. That wasn't the point. She wanted the conversation on the record. As she prepared her remarks, she thought again of Traoré. Not just as a leader, but as a mirror. Both of them had chosen the same impossible thing, to build power from integrity, not access. To give voice not to the wealthy, but to the unheard. One morning she stood at her window watching the sun rise over the Potomac. Far away, that same sun was rising over West Africa. She imagined Traoré doing the same, standing in some quiet room, far from applause, far from cameras. And just like that, she realized, they were living proof that leadership didn't need a global spotlight to matter. It only needed one person, one human being willing to say, "No more hiding." Jasmine presented her proposal the next day. The room was only half full, but she spoke like the world was listening. She talked about how comfort kills progress, about how surveillance feeds fear, about how dignity starts with who we choose to protect. Some colleagues rolled their eyes. Some nodded slowly. Most said nothing. But when the clip hit the internet, it lit up. People were hungry for that kind of bravery, not the viral kind, but the quiet kind, the real kind. Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré stood at a ceremony for a new community-run farming initiative. It wasn't glamorous, but it was theirs. No imported slogans, no outsourced strategies, just people building what was once unthinkable. Independence, two worlds, two timelines, two different kinds of noise, but if you listened closely, you could hear the same heartbeat. Jasmine choosing truth over promotion, Ibrahim choosing sovereignty over safety, and both of them choosing dignity over comfort. Because in the end, that's what real power looks like, not a title, not a position, but a choice. A choice to stand firm when it would be easier to sit back. A choice to stay human in systems that demand compromise. A choice to protect what's right, even when you stand alone. Let's slow things down a little now. Breathe in, breathe out. We've come a long way tonight, from the dust-worn villages of Burkina Faso to the marble corridors of Capitol Hill. But really, we've just been following the same story told in two different languages, one spoken with military resolve, the other through legislative defiance, both carried by hearts that refused to bow to fear. Ibrahim Traoré didn't set out to become a symbol. He was a man who believed that people deserved better than dependency. So he stepped into the void where comfort used to live, and he built something real, something hard. And through every consequence, every warning, every cold shoulder from global powers, he kept walking. He walked not toward popularity, but toward possibility. His people saw that, and it changed them. Jasmine Crockett didn't dream of being a rebel. She came from neighborhoods stitched together by struggle. She knew how fragile trust could be. But when the moment came, when she had to choose between rising quietly through the ranks or raising her voice for those too often ignored, she made the hard choice, not once, but again and again. She paid for it in silence, in skepticism, in political costs. And still, she stood. Both of them walked paths that demanded more than speeches. They offered no applause. They offered only the deep, slow power that grows when you water the roots of something lasting. And that's the lesson tonight. That power, real power, isn't about dominance. It isn't about comfort. It isn't about being liked. It's about being aligned with truth, with people, with legacy. It's about saying, I see what this system expects of me, and I choose something better. Maybe tonight that's what Burkina Faso taught America. That even under pressure, even while isolated, even when your hands are tied by 1,000 invisible expectations, you can still choose dignity. You can still choose to lead without letting the world write your lines for you. So what about you? What decision are you facing right now that feels like a tug of war between comfort and courage? What would your life look like if you stopped waiting for permission and started building from principle? Let me know in the comments. Seriously, drop your thoughts. Others might need your courage the same way you've needed theirs. And if this story spoke to you, even in a quiet, subtle way, do me a favor. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with someone who needs a reason to believe again. Thanks for staying with me.